early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, and the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streamed, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good Wednesday morning, streaming live on Rumble, X, and YouTube on this Wednesday, October 8th, 2025. A handful of times over the past 30 to 35 years that I've been trading, you kind of get to a point where, I don't know if you want to call it throw your hands up, but you get to a point where, you're taking in all this information and you know that, and once you've been through it a couple times, you know that you're probably near a breaking point. Something's about to change. And so that's kind of where I felt the last, I don't know, the last few days especially. And, we talked yesterday about this, the being extremely overvalued in the stocks and the harmonic structures in these treasury markets. And and then I wanted to show you this for, I've mentioned this guy, Martin Armstrong, a couple times. He's got a very sketchy history. 10 years ago, you would have said this guy's a fraud, right? That's what people would have said is 10 years ago, this guy's a scam artist and, his story doesn't add up. But then you watch what goes on and you watch how people get set up and you watch how the big banking system works. And when someone doesn't play ball, right, they need to be taken out of the equation. And this guy was supposedly, right, a pretty big player in the Japanese markets, in kind of an alternative asset manager. And he's built this model, that he says, the government wants it and so forth. And again, you have to wonder, right? Here's the thing that really matters is that every single day he's putting out good content on his website called Armstrong Economics. And you could say, is that because, it's this whole independent media space, right? It's like, okay, how many people can you get to watch you or follow your stuff? And then how many people can you convert over to some sort of a service or a seminar or something like that? And he does a seminar. He's got one coming up in November. And I think it's like $2,000 to go to it. And I've been a couple times. And, there's some interesting people there. There's some really sharp people there. And then there's just good, normal people, good, down-to-earth people trying to figure things out. But you definitely get your weirdos there for sure. The cult, right? The guru. Everybody's following the guru. And so but the other thing too is that he's built a model that is, and he studied a lot of history, right? I mean, he studied currency back to the days that the first form of currency that wasn't, bartering essentially. He's gone back as far as you can possibly go back, and he's done some very unique things to go back. Like he's actually gathered up Roman coins and then watched the evolution of them as they take away the metal content. So let's say that the coins were silver, and then over time, they take the silver out of it and put junk metal in there. Because why? Because the government's about to fail. So that you can see these things happening. So he's done that and he's studied these things. And it's taken, clearly it takes a lot of money and a lot of effort to do something like that. So you can't discredit. But again, if you read his story and you understand, a lot of people would say this guy's a fraud. And there are sketchy things about him, but every day he's putting in content. He's done the hard work, right? And he has this model, right, that he calls the economic confidence model, right? These different things, and he's got a couple different models. Anyway, I'm going to show you the output on one of them here. Let's take a look at this. And I think we're good to go on this. Just to give you an idea of what this looks like, right? So if you happen to go to his site and you take a look at this, and this is on the euro, right? And I've been calling this euro as a fraud for a long time, right? It's one common currency for the whole European region. Everybody floats different debt markets, right? Again, it's supposed to be one. So what they try to do is they try to blend. Each country has its own sovereignty. They get to elect their own officials. They get to run their own debt market, right? But then they have this thing called the European Union, and then they get Ursula von der Leyen, who oversees it. Okay, so they kind of have an overlord, right, over them. And guess what? They pay money into the EU. All right. And then the EU divvies this up depending upon who's being good little boys and good little girls. Right. And so we saw in Poland, for instance, Donald Tusk was the prime minister of Poland at one point. He goes on, becomes a Eurocrat, right? Spends a bunch of time in Brussels with this whole crowd, right? That dictates policy for all of Europe. And then he goes back to during this period of time, Poland wasn't getting a lot of money coming in from the pool of money that everybody in the EU contributes to. As soon as Donald Tusk gets, quote unquote, elected, which wasn't an election, I mean, he got slid into that office. I mean, you can read up on it. It was a scam. Anyway, he gets put into office as prime minister. And guess what happens? All of a sudden, the money starts flowing into Poland, okay, for all these pet projects. So again, that's how the system works, right? That's kind of how this works. Now, this euro's a fraud, okay? And so here we have a couple points of interest, right? We have a directional change coming. What does it show up as? I think it's 9th, 8th, 7th. I can't tell what that date is. Let me see if I can blow it up more. Again, it's a little bit blurry, and I apologize for that. Try to get it as the best I can. Let me take a look at this. So can I even blow this up? Oh, here we go. I can probably see this. So you see that first yellow circle or first yellow arrow. And let me get this, see if I can. And that's on, boy, that's a mess. October, boy, that is really bad. Let me just go to the website here real fast and get it. I think I can pull it up on there. Anyway, the point is it's happening. It doesn't really matter. What matters is this, right? The second one, so you see these things on the side, right? You get, let's just go down through the top. You get this aggregate reading, okay? And then that's supposed to pull all these different components below it into one aggregate reading, right? Then you get this L wave. Then you get this empirical data thing. Then you get long-term trading cycle. And here are the only two things I ever pay attention to: direction change and panic cycle, okay? So you can see that blue square, the second column in, it says direction change. I look at that sometimes in accordance with the stuff that I do, right? The overvalued, all the different technical work, the harmonic structures, the overvalued, undervalued, and all these different things that I've accumulated over time, these tools. So I compare that to the direction change. And then I like to look at the yellow one under where it says panic cycle, because what that means is volatility. That means something's about to happen, right? That's going to cause a flurry in the markets. And for a trader, that's a good thing, right? You want volatility because now all of a sudden the algorithms lose control to some degree. And if you have good tools, you can navigate this volatility. So again, think of it like rough waters, right? You're going through these calm waters and then you're going to go through rough waters. Do you have a decent enough ship that you can navigate those rough waters? And if you can navigate that, then volatility or panic is a good thing for you. Okay. So those are the only two things I look at. He tends to proclaim this aggregate means something. I've never paid that much attention to it. Okay. But I do have a background with this guy, and I do read his stuff because I don't think he's right on quite a bit. Not quite a bit. 20% of things I would say he's off, in my opinion. I just don't think he has maybe 10 to 20% I think he's off. But most of the stuff he's on point, and he talks about things like we do, right? Things that no one else is talking about, or very few people are talking about. And he has a pretty good grasp of how markets work, has a really deep grasp of how debt markets and things like that, especially currency, works. So that's why I pay attention to him, right? He's probably one of the first and foremost people that I think adds value to what we're trying to do is figure this stuff out. Okay. So with that in mind, that gives you a little bit of a look at what his model looks like and the things that I try to take from it, right? The direction change and the panic cycle. And you can subscribe to a service and you can get these things day to day. I don't. I did for a while, and it just, it's not cheap. I don't know. It's like $200 a month or something like that. It's not super cheap, but it's, you know, the, the question is, do you find value in it? And, you know, yes, there's plenty of other stuff to do. And I figure this, when things get heated, right? He's going to publish that stuff. So I've sort of just backed away and I don't subscribe anymore. So and then it forces you to lean on your own stuff more too, right? And in the end, that's the thing. We can take input, and this is really something to consider, right? You know, when you're trading, right? You're essentially, the beauty of it is you're all alone and you get to make your own decisions. The bad part of it is you're all alone and you get to make your own decisions, So most of the time that's great. You get to points like this where things are a little uneasy. Like what's going on with this gold market, it's just, this isn't healthy stuff. What's going on? And we've talked about this, that gold is a very small asset relative to stocks or bonds or currency or something else. So when people move decent sized chunks out of stocks or bonds or currency or something like that, and they move it into gold, it can have an outsized impact, right? Because again, gold is relatively small in comparison to those things. Why is that? Because we got off the gold standard, right? We allowed ourselves to build this big bubble, right? That gets big and big and big and big, and it's not related to gold anymore, right? And so that's what essentially means getting off the gold standard. Gold's this little tiny thing, and you have all these other assets that have gotten out of control, debt, currency, euro, we were just talking about that. And then you have stocks, right? Clearly, we're going to talk about that a little bit today, clearly something's not right here. Okay. That's the thing. And we can see these deals coming through on the AI front. We know something's not right. And we're seeing this because now these guys aren't even competitors. Okay. They're all working together. So they're actually buying each other. So we see, NVIDIA buying Intel, NVIDIA buying into, XAI, right? Which is Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company. And then we go back and we look at okay, well, Elon Musk's story is that he and Sam Altman developed OpenAI, ChatGPT, right? To be this nice thing for humanity, and that they were going to put this thing out there for everyone to use, and it was a not-for-profit type of a thing. But then we see in the documents that Elon Musk clearly wanted access to that thing, and that wasn't really the intent. So that's the outside, the intent that they want to push out there to you. But on the inside, they both wanted to grab a hold of that. And now we see this OpenAI ChatGPT showing up on the private marketplace at $500 billion of net worth, right? We saw that a couple weeks ago with a share offering that they did internally and so forth. So again, we put valuation numbers on all this stuff. And so Sam Altman has money on his eyelids, right? Money sign, dollar sign on his eyelids, right? And so does Elon Musk, and the power and the so forth of everything that goes on with this. So the question is, and there's a bunch of characters. Yesterday there was a guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's now the Lightspark, I think it is. There's so much stuff going on in this. There's just so much stuff going on in the AI space, in the digital currency space, right? And the tokenization. And I think the bridge, I don't think these things are separate. And the healthcare space, right? We're seeing that starting to pick up. And even the legal space, right? I think that's a part of this whole thing too. And even tokenizing, who knows what the heck can be tokenized. But it's tough to get a grip on what is this tokenization. Like I said last week, I'm not even sure the people who are doing this know exactly what it all means. They don't know how it all plugs in and everything else. So I think there's a little bit of a trepidation on their part. Like they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing forward on this. And so it's almost like, misery loves company. And in this case, the unknown loves the unknown, right? And I think there's some of that going on. And that's why I think part of it is they're buying each other, but I also think there could be a bigger plan here, right? And this goes back to that technocracy movement. And things are moving so fast that you almost can't believe that this is a day-to-day event. Like, okay, well, yesterday, we got up and we did this deal with NVIDIA and Intel. You know what? I was thinking while I was asleep and I woke up, and then I just thought, you know what? We should do a deal with, XAI with Elon Musk. That makes a lot of sense. It's not like that, right? I don't think that's what's going on. I don't think it's like a day by day thing. I think that there's some sort of a plan. It feels to me like there's some sort of a plan laid out because the speed at which this stuff is moving is pretty incredible. And the question is it getting government backing, right? Because we know the government's a strong player in this. The government may be the genesis of all these people, right? Of the Sam Altmans, of the Bill Gates and the Larry Ellisons and the Elon Musks and the Palantirs, Joe Lonsdales and the Alex Karps, right? At Palantir and all these tech companies that we're starting to know. Is the government, is the deep state, are they the genesis of this whole quote unquote private, AI technology space? That's a big question. And so is the government facilitating and paving the way for them? And I think we're seeing signs that they are. Okay. We talk about these sovereign wealth funds, right? We talk about the stuff that's going on in the health space, right? Clearing the way for direct from the pharma companies direct to consumer. That's clearing out a pathway, right? Direct sales. And then we're seeing this on the financial front too. And that's what I want to get into today. Okay. So we'll go into that stuff now. And so some of these, just to give you a little bit of reference, like what I'm feeling is, in 2001, I remember feeling there were other things going on, right? We had Asian currency crisis had just occurred in 1998. Long-term capital management had just occurred. And, I was going back to graduate school at the time and, you're watching this bubble being built in the NASDAQ and you're trying to figure out what's going on with it. And then you go to work for a company that actually gets money from that, from the penalties to build a system that's supposed to help people, the individuals not get burned by another NASDAQ bubble. And the product was never released. I've talked about that once or twice in here. So you watch this stuff evolve, and then you get these uneasy feelings. And then there are times when all of a sudden it just opens up. Like I can remember being there with the owner, Ned Davis's son, and I was working with him and a couple interns, and I saw this pattern occur in the NASDAQ, and I was like, here's the bottom right here. And so these guys, they jumped in and they started buying, right? Because we'd had conversations and I was helping them with some technical things like that. They were trading, right? They were getting introduced to trading. So they piled in and they bought it. Well, a couple of days later, they came back and they said, yeah, my dad wants to see you, right? So I went up and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. So I go up and I see Ned Davis and he's like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing giving advice to my son on stocks and things? I'm like, oh, we were just, just a couple guys sitting around and, and I said, hey, this looks like a pattern. It's a bottom. And he's like, well, so then he was all curious, right? How did you know that? Because the market just ripped. Like it was like a 3-day rip from there, right? It was a bottom and then it filled the gap and it was just off to the races, right? And so this was in that period of time as the NASDAQ bubble was popping, all right? So again, you go through these uneasy feeling periods of time and then all of a sudden things can just open up if you're paying enough attention. Right. And then the same thing with the 2006 to 2008 real estate crisis. You could feel it coming, right? This uneasy, ominous cloud that just seemed to hang over the system. And then I remember when it actually happened, funny enough, we had a hurricane come through Ohio, which never happens, it was blowing down trees and people's blowing over mailboxes and things, right? But and I'll never forget that. Because, it was just this literally like a cloud, over as the crash was occurring on Monday. But again, we really never crashed because the Federal Reserve and the Hank Paulson, who we were talking about the other day, the Treasury Secretary who'd come over from Goldman Sachs, they came in and they did a bailout, right? Paulson apparently got on his knees begging Pelosi to do the deal. Again, this big story, that goes around the 2008 real estate bubble popping. And I can remember so many things about that, this dark cloud type of a feeling. Then we get this flash crash. I remember when that happened in the 2000, I want to say 14 or 15, we get this, 10-minute flurry in the markets where you get this flash crash. And I could feel an uneasy feeling like this market needed to sell off, And then you get to the 2019 repo crisis, right? So you get this uneasy feeling. And then obviously, that leads to the repo crisis, which probably hardly anybody even knows or remembers happened. But that was the precursor to COVID, right? I believe that is how they set up the money, right, to flow during the warp speed, this whole program, this big wealth power transfer that occurred during that period of time through the healthcare space. Okay. And so And the repo crisis set the stage for that, right? Allowed it to grease the wheels of the Treasury and the Fed and so forth. Okay, got them all ready, right? Treasury gave the Fed 10-to-1 leverage, put $500 billion up there, for the Fed to basically use and lever up 10-to-1 as needed. So again, that's the bazooka, right? The quote unquote bazooka, right? Where the government comes in and does this big bailout. So again, the government tends to pave the way sometimes for these events that are about to occur. And we know that there's a lot of things cooking in the background right now. We've got the potential of World War III that doesn't get covered. We've got social unrest. We've got big protests going on in the UK, Italy, France, parts of Asia, right? And it does not get covered, right? There's one that's been going on in Italy for the last 3 or 4 days. It's massive, right? Massive protest. And apparently it's against Israel, okay? And all this stuff that's going on in Israel and Gaza and the Palestinians and Hamas and all that stuff, right? But we don't get any coverage of that stuff. Martin Armstrong covers it. That's why I bring him up at the beginning of the show. He does cover that stuff, right? So he's doing a lot of heavy lifting, and he's got pretty good sources out there. So again, I wouldn't trust it like it's, rock solid. Read it, challenge it. That's why I say if you guys want to read his stuff and bring it in here, we can talk about it. That's great. Because I like to challenge that stuff. I don't like to just make this guy a guru, and then all of a sudden you're following him. Okay. So that kind of sets the stage. Boy, it's 20 minutes in again. All right. Sometimes I think that's like a 2-minute lead in, and then it turns out to be 20 minutes. Okay. So I think we went through that. Okay. I think we're good. All right, so let's go into this. There's not much economic data. That's why I haven't been covering it. And one other thing I was going to mention is, so I've got someone out there willing to help me on some of the data. It's just, and other things, right? But starting with the data, the problem is then the data goes away. It's almost a comedy act, right? You're like, someone's going to help me, put together the data and work together, and then the data, just no more data, Okay, you can't make it up. Well, then yesterday, Rachel Hawk mentioned in here, DaVinci and for downloading these and that's what I use, right? So I have the camera that I have ties in with DaVinci, and some of the switching gear I have ties in with DaVinci. So it's all one big package. And so I don't know if you have experience in that, Rachel, but if you do, I'd love it. If you do, and you're an expert or you have time to spare on that, I'd love to. If you could help me with some of that, that would be great, right? Because then I could start running some clips again. I'm still having issues. Anyway, I don't need to bore you guys with that. But if you mentioned that yesterday, Rachel, download DaVinci. I use that. That's what I use. It's a great program. You can tell it's a fantastic program, but it's also not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, there's a lot of buttons and switches on there, And so someone who's a pro, that would be super helpful. If you know it and you're willing to help me, I would appreciate that. So again. And hopefully, anyway, we'll just keep rolling. I just saw that in the chat yesterday at the end yesterday, and I thought I'd mention that today. Okay, so let me jump in there and say hello. So we got Rachel. Good morning, Crash and Splash. Gordon Q, Geo Rich, Jay White. Good morning, Jay White. Rachel, I was just messaging you about DaVinci. Oh, okay, great. On your journal, on your website. Okay, perfect. Well, what I'll do is, if you can, I've got an email, development@world-hd.com. So it's development@world-hd.com. And if you could send an email to there and we can connect, and at least if you have any thoughts on it, that would be great, because I would love to get this back up and running. And it'd be great if rather than me go and reinvent the wheel, I'd rather just have someone help me, install the wheel, fix the wheel, and get the wheel working. And then I can actually pull down these clips. I don't really, it's not my favorite stuff, and so I don't dive into it very well. All right, so let's go, let me jump over to this and take a look at some of the again, not much economic data for the week, right? Because obviously the government shut down. So the takeaway for this week, though, is that the Fed is independent of the government, right? That's the good and the bad of it, all right? We know the bad, right? Because we don't really know who's behind. We do, but we're not supposed to know. How's that? We're not supposed to know who's behind the Federal Reserve, okay? And we're not supposed to know that it's an independent agency, that it's supposed to sound like a governmental agency, but now we see that it's not, because they're out talking nonstop. They're getting paid, right? All these Fed members are still getting paid to go on their speaking engagements. And we have over 13 of them this week, speaking engagements by the FOMC members, and then Jerome Powell on Thursday. So that's the real big takeaway. And then we see Christine Lagarde out talking, and we see Governor Bailey speaking about issues in the UK. And so they're really not the central bankers Christine Lagarde and Governor Bailey really aren't supposed to be talking about things inside the government, but they're being forced to, right? Because these things are flaring up. So this stuff that's going on in France, okay, is forcing Christine Lagarde to address it, okay? And remember, that should be more Ursula von der Leyen, all right? And so both, funny enough, both unelected officials, okay, and yet both the ones that have a lot of power over what's going on in that area. All right, so a lot of speakers this week being forced to talk about things on the global front that they wouldn't necessarily be interested in talking about. We saw, last night, Bank of Japan Governor Ueda out speaking too, right after this Takaichi, the prime minister, was just voted in, and some interesting things on that. I want to dissect it a little bit more and go through a little bit more of what he had to say, because they didn't cover it very well, right? It was little snippets here and there, and I have to go back and figure out what was really said and do some digging on that. And so, okay, but anyway, 3 major central banks this week: Christine Lagarde, European Central Bank, Bank of England, Governor Bailey, and Ueda, the Bank of Japan, out speaking. And then ours, right? Jerome Powell, too late Jay, speaking on Thursday. Okay, so that's, again, a lot of heavy hitters out speaking, and then all the FOMC members out speaking this week too. And then there's a lot of smaller ones too in the European Central Bank that are also out speaking. Okay, so there's a lot of input coming in. And the other thing, like I said, even though we're not getting this economic data, even though the market's not getting this economic data, it's flowing just like it ever has to the central bank. Okay, they're not missing a beat. They're getting a lot of private data. They have a lot of private data. We saw Carlyle Group yesterday, which is a private equity group, pretty shady in many different ways. They're giving their private data to the Fed, okay, which they probably have been all along anyway. So these guys are still getting their data. We're just the ones that aren't getting our data. And I'm sad to say it, but we might want to probably prepare to get used to that, because it seems like the direction things are heading, right? And that it's always been that way. It may just be getting worse. Okay, so we'll just have to watch and see how this unfolds. But I'm getting again another eerie feeling about this whole thing, of how this whole thing's going down. Okay, and okay, so government shutdown. Well, I think we're good on that. Let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to mention on this? I think that's it. I think we're good on that. All right, let me go to this. Let's hit some headlines here. Start rolling through these things. Okay, government shutdown day 8. 2 key things on that. Mike Johnson out saying there will be discussions about back pay for government or certain government workers. This is after, President Trump threatened no pay for shutdown workers. Okay, so again, here's the battle. Obviously, we know that what's going to solve this? What's the real agenda? I think they're all watching the polls, trying to test the waters, see what they can say, see what they can do, see where things stand. There's an agenda going on here. Again, who's on whose side? I don't even know anymore. Right, left, Democrat, Republican. I almost think there's one agenda, and that's them against us, right? That's what I'm starting to feel like is going on. And for some people, that won't be a big surprise. For other people, that's a hard thing to swallow. And I could be wrong, but that's the way I see things going. And so the question is, what's the result of this? What do they get out of it? Hopefully, right, what we would love to see is that President Trump has a breakthrough here, and we aren't going to do these big package bills. We're going to break things apart one by one so we can actually see what's going into this stuff, where the money's being spent, right? That's what we would love to see. Is that what we're going to get? I highly doubt it, okay? That would be a great thing, right? That would be an encouraging thing to see, that we're not going to do it the same old way, guys. This is how we're going to do it. I highly doubt that that's what's going to happen here. Okay, keep rolling here. EU-U.S. trade deal shifting. All right. See if I can put this together today. I'm going to try to put this theme together. I always try to do that, right? You take the topics that are going on, and sometimes you form a theme, and, is there a theme there? Are you trying to make something out of nothing, or is there really a theme here? And so here's the deal, is that the EU and the U.S. created this deal back in July, okay? It was Ursula von der Leyen, President Trump, and they essentially settled on 15% across the board for tariffs on most traded goods. And there was some pushback on the EU, but finally they just took it, right? It was about the best deal they thought they could get. And it showed to us how dependent people are on who? We the people, right? The U.S. consumption engine, okay? And we are the biggest game in town, right? 60 to 70% of our economy is driven by consumption, and therefore a lot of the world's economy is driven by our consumption as well. So if our consumption engine slows down, the rest of the world probably slows down as well. All right, so we saw how powerful we were. We saw this get exerted upon the EU, other countries around the world. We saw the tariffs being used, and in hopefully our favor, right? That's the key. We wanted to see that we could get a fair trade deal. We could get a level playing field for trade, right? That we could make good products and we could now get access to other markets, okay? I've talked about this on the soybean front, the connections with Argentina. There's some bad things going on. Argentina's hanging by a thread right now, just as a side note. They're basically desperate for this lifeline, this swap line, right, with the U.S., okay? Either that or they're going to have to go to the World Bank, the IMF, or somebody like that and drum up a loan, okay, because they're hurting. And, or at least that's the story we're being told. Again, we only get the numbers that we can see. But back to the point, right, we see that our consumption engine is powerful, and it was being used to recreate this global trade negotiation structure, okay, that was out there. That had been, again, we go back, President Trump went back to NAFTA and said that was the biggest shaft job. That if you think about it, that ties in with moving things to China, right? Moving the manufacturing out of the U.S. into China, and it ties in with NAFTA and how they structured that whole thing. Then we got the USMCA under President Trump, and then now we're getting this whole new thing, right? I don't know if there is a name to it, but this renegotiation of tariffs. And so this is part of it, right? This 15% deal. Now, here's the problem, is that there's concern in Brussels, okay? Again, that's where all these Eurocrats, right, hang out, okay? That's their home base. And they're questioning the sanctity of this deal, okay? They're saying that these digital technology rules, okay, which the EU has been pretty strong on, they're willing to bend in a lot of different ways, but this is one of the things they haven't been willing to bend on, right? And so it's bend until bend or break, and I think they're taking the break approach, right? They don't like this digital technology rule, this corporate compliance, I need to do a whole show on this at some point, or do it with Aaron Day sometime and go through this whole thing. But it's this digital front, okay, that is, it's sort of like the battle line in my mind, right? Think of it like that. It's like the battle line where people are putting up a front and saying our laws aren't allowing that. So if you take the U.S., we don't really know what laws have been created that are underneath the surface, okay? You got to pass the bill to know what's in it, that kind of a thing. So these bills get put out there, and then they just get kind of logged, right? And then if there is a plan here and someone's working against, the U.S., right, and this Western economy, then what you would do is you would play the long game, right, and you would stack up these laws, one on each other, right, so that it forms, and you basically take away rights over time. And that's what we're seeing, right? We see that. When you go to sign and you go to download an app, you basically just have to hit accept it, or you don't get the app, right? There is no choice. There's very little choice, And, when you go on any website, there's cookies on here. Do you want them or not? If you don't want them, then you're probably not going to get full access to the deal, right? And so the EU's put up resistance against some of the stuff, right? And we see this guy, Vlad Tenoff, I call him Vlad the Impaler of Robinhood, making really strong strides in Europe on this tokenization front and into this space, right? Into this whole digital space. How he's getting access, I don't know, okay? We have to question that. But part of this trade negotiation is now they're starting to almost use it like a Trojan horse, right? To plow in and get the EU to change some of its digital laws, okay? So, concerns there. This just popped this morning, so I don't have any more details on than that. I just did some researching on it and tried to put it together with what I feel like's going on. So, a couple weeks ago, the Trump administration, they were over in the UK, $10 billion into UK AI, data centers, all that kind of stuff. And then since today's Energy Day, right, we have to talk about this. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of money going into the data centers, the AI, the chips, all the stuff, and yet very little is talked about on the energy side or the cooling side of these data centers, right? And so the UK doesn't have great energy situation, right? They fell for this green, this Green New Deal, part of probably the, King Charles and, and the previous prime ministers there and the whole influence through the UK Parliament and so forth. Anyway, they fell for this. They went down this green energy deal, solar, wind, that kind of stuff. So they don't really have the power that's needed unless they start taking it from where? From the people. All right. Okay, so that's a big question. Now, so it's a lot on these digital technology rules. That's what we want to watch for the next couple of days, to see what happens in the UK. If this thing just gets steamrolled, then this is another black cloud that's kind of flying over our heads, at least my head, saying, this doesn't feel good. What's going to be the result of this? What's going to come out of this? Okay, so the U.S. wants to basically change the goalposts on some of these regulations, and EU regulations on big tech, saying that they're too onerous. Okay, so they're trying to get them to lax them, right? Chop down some of these, regulatory boundaries that have been placed out there, so that, why? So that, and this is the question, why? You've got the deal, you've got the trade deal. Why are we pushing so hard for them to do this? Is it for good? Is it for bad, right? Is it to open up trade? Is it to expand this technocracy into that region? Because it's been resistant, right? They don't have the laws. We don't even know what we've passed. The UK probably, how do I put that? We may have been asleep at the switch as a lot of these things were getting stockpiled, these laws. The UK maybe not as much, right? The EU maybe not as much. Maybe, right? These are the things I'm questioning. And if that's the case, you need to level that out so that the technocracy can expand into the European region, into the Western economies. Okay, just a thought. I'm all up for, challenge and debate on that. But that's what I'm watching for. Okay, this would be a bad sign for this technocracy movement if that were the case. Okay, so kind of hang on to that concept, right? So we have Japan, the new PM, Takaichi. Okay, we talked about that. She's all for spending, handouts, pacifying the people, defense spending. President Trump's going to be meeting with her as this whole thing goes through their parliament by the end of October. Okay, so we're going to want to see what happens with that. We have France, Macron, right, and his disastrous government situation, right? It's a total train wreck. Is he going to step down? What's going to happen there? It would be great if he did, because that might bring in Marine Le Pen. And the question is, she's more of a conservative, right? She fits. It would be very interesting to see what kind of headway she could make, kind of like we saw with Italy's Meloni. All right, it would be a very similar situation. Although I think she's probably a little tougher than Meloni. All right, Marine Le Pen. She's a pretty hard battler. So it would be very interesting to see if she actually could find a way to get some sort of create. If Macron steps down, then they have to have snap elections of some type, right? And somehow they're going to have to go through this, and it will be a mess. However, I'm sure they have a process, but it will be messy no matter what. So it would be fascinating to me if we had a good chance to get a look at Marine Le Pen and what she would do in France and what kind of progress she could make there. That would be very fascinating. The long story there. Okay. Then we get this UK digital ID resistance. We saw that, right? We talked about that this week. I don't think I still have that up here. I would show it. Yeah, I don't think I have that. Anyway, the UK is putting up resistance against this digital ID. Does this tie in with what we're talking about here in lowering the bar for the digital expansion, right? Then we have the Italian protests. I talked about that, right? Massive, massive protests going on, supposedly about Israel, Gaza, Palestine, Palestinians, Hamas, that, everything that's going on there and the atrocities. Is that the real reason, or is there more reasons to it? We don't know. Again, I'm not in the crowd. I'm not polling the people. I'm not having conversations. So I don't know what it's about. I just know there's big protests going on there. And as far as I know, we're not being made aware of it, right? Okay, but you can go on there. Like I said, Martin Armstrong has some video clips of people out there, so you can see they're big crowds. And again, anything can be manipulated. I just don't think that's the case. I think we're just not being told. Okay, then we have this concern I have around the war front. The U.S. giving the Ukraine coordinates and long-range missiles to be used. We're seeing Germany stepping up. We're seeing the drones starting to really get engaged here. And was Ukraine just a test ground for this next war? One, to weaken Russia. Two, to utilize these drones and see how they work, learn, right? Test them, learn, test them, learn. And who to do that better with? U.S. money, right? U.S. money goes into this whole thing. $300 billion, who knows how much. And now our technology, and we don't know, again, we know very little on what's going on there. All right. Okay. So keeping all that in mind, right? Here's the economic side of this. This is something that we understand, right? BMW cuts annual guidance on weak China sales. All right. So luxury demand in China is low. And we've talked about this. One, probably because the Chinese economy isn't all that strong. Okay. That's part of it. Two, electric cars, right? We know that BYD, I forget how you pronounce this one. It's Xiaomi. Xiaomi. I think it's Xiaomi. I'm pretty sure that's how they pronounce it. But those are the two big ones. But they have a lot of electric vehicle car manufacturers in China, and they do what they always do, right? They get the technology and they overbuild it. We've talked about that many times in here. Overbuild, build up a huge amount of supply surplus, and what does that do? It decreases demand for other, especially combustion engine cars coming in from outside the world. And think about these electric vehicles, right? This plays right into this whole technocracy thing, that they're all computerized, computer controlled. And if you want to control how people move about, right, then electric vehicles is perfect, right? It's all on a computer. It's all probably connected to the cloud or something like that. And not only that, everything about it is able to be everything about it's able to be controlled, right? Just everything about it. The battery power, the electricity, who owns them, who gets the ability to drive them. Again, if they're taking away freedoms, electric vehicles is a unbelievable way to start doing that, right? How people move about. Okay, so there we have that, right? Germany has proposed. Here's the other thing, right? China's dominant in that whole EV space. Now, to tie this in with what's going on, the weakness because of this, right? This is how Germany's been strong, is automotive manufacture for a long time. So to show the weakness that's going on, we can see this. Germany is now proposing raising the retirement age to 73, okay, in an effort to prevent the collapse of their pension system, all right? Okay, so they tell you, just briefly, right? They told us in, to 2014, 15, really coming out of the 2008 real estate crisis, they told us that they were going to allow, this goes back to Angela Merkel, right, and allowing people to migrate into Germany, in sympathy for Greece and all the things that had happened, during this whole window of time where we had the economic struggles that came on the backside of the 2008 real estate crisis, and essentially the austerity that was placed upon Greece. So the whole concept was, well, okay, well, then we'll let them come to Germany, right? Well, look, that wasn't the reason, right? It was, and what they said was, we'll allow these migrants to come to Germany, and then they'll fill in because we have a population issue, right? We have this, a demographic issue that we can't meet the needs of the future unfunded liabilities for the pension system and the healthcare and all these other things. So we're going to bring these migrants in and we'll have them fill the spots. So it sounds good, right? Except the culture clash, and the two just didn't jive, right? Now, what they're saying is it's actually this migrant flow, okay, that was allowed to come up there that's actually putting the burden on this pension system worse than ever before. So it's a collapsing of their pension system, a collapsing of all these promises that were made can't be kept now. And so the only way to do that is to do what? Take it away from the people and raise the retirement age to 73, right? Take away these things, take away holidays, take away, increased taxes, wealth taxes, right? These are the kind of things we're going to see. This is why France is having these issues, right? This is why they can't get through this budget deal, all right? So it's the same kind of a thing that's going on all across Europe, and a lot of this comes back down to, the destruction of the combustion engine, right? And freedom, right? Because you can think combustion engine, gas stations, freedom, and then this electric vehicle rollout, okay, and this autonomous vehicle, because that's what's probably coming next, right? Part of this XAI deal, Elon Musk and so forth, it's all about autonomous vehicles. All right. Okay, so see if I keep pulling this together. All right, let's take a look at this. I want to show you this. We've got this, okay. All right. This is the percent of the annual U.S. federal budget, okay, that goes toward what are called unfunded liabilities. So promises that have been made that there's no money there to keep them. Okay, Social Security, about 16% of the federal budget goes to that every year. Medicare, 12%. Medicaid, 7%. So somewhere between 30 and 40%, okay, is going of our government budget is going toward these, these, let me make sure I get caught up here. Okay, I think we're caught up. Is going toward these promises that can't be kept. All right. And so think back to, what's going on in Europe. It's not a lot. It's not that much different. We're just on a delay from that whole situation. Okay. And a lot of that's because of President Trump, because we've been getting in this foreign direct investment, right? We're sort of keeping things going. The stock market's going all time highs. The bond market's kind of hanging in there, right? The currency, and then this tech bubble, right? A lot of the reason that the stock market's going up is driven by this tech bubble. Okay, so it's sort of this circular reference again. And I'm going to get into this here in a second, the circular reference that's going on. I have that thing of these companies buying each other, right? And the risk that brings. So when you have all these deals going on, let me just pull that up. Let's take a look at this real fast. Okay, so it's a pretty crummy, I'm going to work on this a lot, right? It's a pretty crummy chart, but you can see Aaron Day and I are going to build this out extensively, but I wanted to keep it kind of small here so we didn't add too much on it, but also just start to make the connections here of what's gone on in the last few weeks. Okay, so we've got NVIDIA and OpenAI pretty central to this whole tech deal, right? Money flowing back and forth. So we got some red lines, green lines, blue lines, purple lines, and so forth. We know that there's been a deal struck between OpenAI and AMD. Okay, AMD provides chips that OpenAI needs. NVIDIA provides chips that OpenAI needs, right? NVIDIA needs Intel chips, right? And they get their chips from TSMC, Taiwan Semi, out of Taiwan, right? And then we have Microsoft in the equation here too, right? Deals that have been struck with Microsoft, with OpenAI, and with NVIDIA recently, okay? Now here's the problem. What I didn't add in there is today's deal with NVIDIA and xAI, right? Which is Elon Musk's technology, AI, right? Okay. So let me go on to that, right? Let's go down here and and when we think about this, it's hard to enter into the equation the demographics, okay? The demographics of Europe, the demographics of the US, and this is hard to interject in it, but it is pretty important. There was a guy all through late 1990s into 2012, I would say. His name was Harry Dent. He used to put out stuff all the time talking about, the U.S. is going to come to this demographic shift when the baby boomers get to this age, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. There was all these charts, right? All these charts warning us of what was going to happen when we get to this demographic shift. That's where we're at. And there's no coverage of this, right? No one's talking about demographics. So that's what concerns me too, right? Is that we're not dealing with the issues, And so how are they going to deal with it? With the technology, right? With the robotics, with the AI. They're going to try to fill the gap with that. The question is it going to be to our benefit or is it not, right? And that's the danger with all this stuff, right? So again, it comes right back to what we always talk about, the fear of this technology. It's great on one hand, right? It's very powerful if it gets used for the people. It's very bad if it doesn't. All right. Okay. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And that ties back to these pension systems, the Social Security, the Medicare, all these unfunded liabilities, okay, that are stressed, heavily stressed. All right. And it's not being covered. It's really not being covered very well. We just run up more debt, with the idea that we're never going to pay it back and we never really deal with it, right? And so forth. Okay. So now we've got this billions of dollars being put toward AI, okay, but very little being put toward the energy grid, okay? And there's really no synchronization here. And that's the thing that we have to watch for. The thing that I'm questioning the most is it's like they're acting like they can take all the existing energy that's there, okay, and not really caring much about the additional energy that would be needed for all these systems. So that to me, right, you're adding all this new demand for chips and data centers, and you're adding it very quickly, right? They're building this stuff at breakneck speed and throwing it up. Again, more money going into it. That means another data center, 6 to 9 months, the thing will be up and running, right? And yet we're not really talking about the energy needs that goes along with it. Now, maybe they're working on this. Maybe there's some alternative energy form, right, that's out there. We did see the coal stuff, right? David was in here talking about that, the opening up of 4 million acres. What's 4 million acres of federal land for coal leases up to 13 million acres, right? So trying to bring the coal backup, right? Coal generation to feed the electrical grid. So that is one thing, right? And we talk about these small nuclear reactors. Maybe we don't need a grid if these small nuclear reactors are going to come online in the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, then maybe the burdens on the grid aren't needed. Okay, so these are the things we're thinking about. All right. Okay, so the here's the deal with this with Elon Musk, XAI. It's a $20 billion deal. And I don't know if I have that on here or not. Let me see if I do. Okay. We'll go back to the gold thing. So XAI and this NVIDIA strike a deal. And it's not straight up, right? They're using this. This is how crazy this is getting. All right. So they're using a special purpose vehicle. Okay. And this will allow NVIDIA to rent chips to XAI. So XAI won't necessarily be buying them; they'll be renting them. Okay, and so and what's funny about this is actually one of the more straightforward deals that you can get your hands around, you can get your head around. Okay, and there's a lot of other quirky deals that have gone on, like on that chart that I just showed you. You know, over the past few weeks, there are a lot of quirky deals that have gone on, and you can't quite figure out what's behind them, how this is being funded, how it's being paid for. We see, you know, the debt issuance coming through Oracle, but we haven't seen that trickle over to other companies of a lot of these other deals yet. But we know that it's coming, right? We can see that they're paving the way for that, more debt. Okay, so they're gonna. In the past, there's been so much money that's been created by these big tech companies that they could just do this with cash. That's changing, right? I don't know if they're running out of cash, but they're seeing that they need more money than what they can spin off. And remember that they're running deficits now, building these data centers and all this other stuff, right? They're plunking huge amounts of money into it, and they don't see the returns on it yet. Okay, how quick is that going to happen? And what do those returns even mean? Like what? Again, back to tokenization, right? Taking of assets, tokenizing things, tokenizing data, tokenizing all this stuff. So right now, all these things are free, right? You can go on to ChatGPT, you can use it, you get sort of addicted to it, and then all of a sudden they're going to find a way to to monetize it. Okay, how are they going to do that? That's the big question. Okay, so again, these are rental deals, right? XAI is renting this stuff from NVIDIA. So that makes NVIDIA kind of like a banker, right? To some degree. The question is who's banking for NVIDIA, all right? We don't know. So there are a couple other things. Here's the other big factor with this is that right now, the stock market's on all-time highs, so they're being rewarded for this. Okay, they're being rewarded for these crazy deals. And you go back to 2001, the NASDAQ bubble, and I talked about this the other day just a little bit, how we ended up taking the hit on that, the people. That's why I got the job that I got out of graduate school, right, was to make a product so that didn't happen again. Okay, and here we are. We're doing it all over again, right? So it's very frustrating to me to see that we didn't fix the problem back in 2001 with the NASDAQ bubble. But what did happen with the NASDAQ bubble is the people in power ran off with all the technology, the productivity, all that kind of stuff. And they basically put that under their little domain. While we got screwed, okay, the people got screwed. Their 401ks, their savings, they piled into the stuff at the wrong time. Why? Because they were lured into it because it was on all-time highs. And NASDAQ's going, to the moon. Anything with a .com was going through the roof. And so here we are again, right? And these guys are being rewarded, okay, for this kind of behavior, creating these concocted deals that nobody understands. They understand it. We don't understand it, right? And right now, we're being lured into this situation. And so with gold, right? Gold blowing through 4,000. What's going on there? The stock market on all-time highs, or near them, right? Yesterday we saw a little bit of a sell-off. The question is, are we going to do this whole thing all over again? And what's the cost? Is it the same thing it was in 2001 where people just lose some money and then we pick up the pieces and we go on? And, really from 2001 to 2025, I mean, we've had a couple big blips in there, the 2008 real estate crisis, the COVID, a couple of these things, but all in all, it was a pretty prosperous window of time for most people. I mean, homes got bigger, cars got nicer, savings accounts got bigger, job pay got higher for most people. Is that stuff about to change on the backside of this one? That's a big question. Is there a big shift taking place here? Or are we just? It looks like we're going to do the exact same thing over again. What are going to be the results of it when this happens? Okay. Has had some orders getting filled. Okay, and so I think that's it. I want to take a look at a couple charts here. I think there's. Let me see if there's anything else. I'm going to come back and talk about that maybe just a little bit. Jamie Dimon was in Europe yesterday. Let me add this onto it on the AI front. So there are a lot of things we could go into with Jamie Dimon talking about this, but he was asked a specific question. You guys have pumped a lot. What are you doing on AI, and where do you guys stand? And he said, look, we pumped in about $2 billion. I think they say they pump in about $2 billion into AI every year, and they've been doing it for 10 years. You know, you can call them large language models, you know, what do they call it? AGI, so artificial general intelligence. Okay. And that seems to be what people are really going after, is who's going to control the hub of this, right? Who's going to be the center hub and control this stuff? And whoever does that's going to control the tokenization, the financing, all this stuff, the controls around this stuff. He was asked, what are you guys doing in this space? He said, we've been spending $2 billion for a long time. We're finally at the break-even point where we feel like we're getting $2 billion of benefit out of the other side. So it's a 10-year process, okay, to do that. Now, when all these other companies are dumping this kind of money in and they're running, how long is it going to take them? Is it 10 years? Or is it going to be sooner? These are the kind of things that we ask, right? You know, how are we going to, if we're in this bubble and we are, and we're about to go through it again, you know, how devastating will it be on the backside? How long is the recovery rate for these companies? How much do we end up holding? Or do we get out of the markets, right? That's the question. Can people get out and forego the last 10? Because this thing could bubble up. People are talking about 9,000 in the S&P, right? And it's at what, 67, 77 now. So you're talking under 7,000. People are talking it could go to 9,000, right? On some kind of a, and we saw that, you know, with the NASDAQ bubble, right? When they started talking about this thing's a bubble in 1996, 1997, it went on for 4 or 5 more years and it went up huge, right? So can people stay away from it? Can they navigate this? That's the big question. All right, so let's go and take a look at a couple of these charts. Hopefully that makes some sense. We got the finance side, the JP Morgan, right? Talking about the AI gives us a reference point that this does take time to make it play out. Are people learning and making it go quicker because of the innovation? Maybe, but look, JP Morgan's pretty solid on the AI front. They're a big power player. When there are a lot of things I don't like about JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon, but the one thing you have to take value in is that, like he says, it took us 10 years, right, of investment in this to actually just find a break-even point. All these other things we see going on, this, you know, I'm buying this, I'm leasing these chips to you, you know, you're going to do this, we're going to do that, you know, it's going to go into this. I mean, all this, you know, is there a big plan here, or is this thing just going to unravel and become a big mess? You know, that's the other side of this hardly anyone talks about is, you know, the technocracy side's one side of things. You know, if they have a plan and if they can push this through, then yeah, that's a big fear for us too. What's the other side of it is if this thing just collapses financially, right, and kicks off this debt spiral. You know, there's a couple different things, couple different big risks here that this thing could blow up. And why could it blow up? Because they're afraid that they're going to get exposed. They have to move very fast on this. And so will the system hold together? Can they keep it patched up long enough? Can Takaichi in Japan keep the bond market intact? Can France keep their bond market intact? Can Germany keep their bond market intact? Can the UK keep their debt market intact? Can we keep our debt market intact, right? If you can keep all these things intact long enough, then they might be able to push their way through this. If something goes wrong and this thing starts to unravel, it might be a blessing in some ways, but it'll be a very hard period of time, right, for people. So it's a lot. I know it's a lot. That's a lot of stuff, right? But that's kind of where my head's at, is I talk about this ominous cloud that I think is floating over us, and we're at this point of shift, right? We're at this potential point where things could change, right? And let me just go back to this real quickly. And this whole thing, right? October 9th, right? A panic cycle in the European Union. We're seeing these things come about. UK, Germany, France, you know, potential war, right, with Russia. This stuff is there. If this guy's right, Martin Armstrong, and it coincides with the things that I'm seeing, right? This massive, you know, overvalued in stocks, you know, what's going to be the other side of this, right? That's the thing. So in some ways, I have more questions here than I have answers, right? And they're coming in. if I come up with 2 answers a day, it feels like there's, 10 questions coming in, right? It's an overwhelmed period of time where there's so much stuff coming in and you're trying to sort it out. That's why it's good to look at the markets. Let them do a lot of the work. All right. So let's go take a look at this, look at some charts here. All right. Let's dive in here, take a look at this S&P. So I'm looking at this, and we saw this move down yesterday. And during the show, I was doing a little bit of selling just because I felt like it was we've got an energy build going on here, right, on a little bit longer term time frame. So there's an energy build here, and it just wasn't releasing on the upside like it could have. So the question is, is there a potential for a sell-off here? And yesterday during the show, I think this is where we were at. Yeah, this is where we're at. Let me just mark this. Okay. So we've got this. We were kind of getting that spike higher, right? And it wasn't divergent, right? There wasn't divergence there, but it has a lot of the characteristics of divergence, okay? So I was selling into that, and then we get this nice push down, okay? So we get this push down. It breaks lows, right? That's the big thing, is it breaks a couple prior lows back in here, right? So we've got a low here, we've got a low here, and a low here, and this low broke below all those, right? So we broke all those yesterday, okay? And this goes all the way back into, but basically back into this area. Okay, so we have this low back on October 2nd, right? But that's what we challenged yesterday, was the low of October 2nd. And then what do we get? We get this upward sloping consolidation channel, right? And, you could sort of start drawing this, I would say, about right around in here. You could get a grip that maybe there was something going on. You need a couple data points to start drawing this. But as you get toward the end of a significant, strong down day like that, you know that it's probably going to take a break at minimum. So you can start then using some of those data points to draw something like this. So that's what I was doing, putting in this upward sloping trend channel, right? Trying to connect this. And what does it do? It gives you the ability then to kind of trade this consolidation range and build a position. So, market comes down, you take some profits, and now you're looking for places to add to it. So you start trying to sell, up on the upper end of this trend channel. Maybe this would be an ideal spot right there, if you could find that one. And then where we're at right now is pretty good. You could see a lot of sideways aggregation. So the question is this: our risk is low here to be short this market. Okay, we've got this moving average. You can see this black, moving average coming across, right? You can see the prior, hit here back in. Let me just put this in yellow. All right, so we get a pullback into this moving average here, right? Multiple times, okay, 4 times, and then it flips over yesterday, right? It blows right through that moving average. And what's it doing now? It's coming back up to retest it. So the risk is really low right here to take a short in this market. Now, if you're wrong, okay, and it doesn't work, you're going to know pretty quickly, right? It's going to move back and it's going to spend a little time above that black moving average. However, if this is some sort of a top, a swing high forming, then this should hold, okay? And we should see the market break down below this consolidative trend channel right in here. Okay, something like that today, we should see it break down. It could also follow this thing a little bit longer, right? It could come down here, maybe go back up, test it again, come back down, test it, or it could just trade up in this range for a while, right? And just go sideways for a while and still respect the upward sloping trend channel. But if this thing starts to break down, okay, and we go back down and we start retesting, this purple line, this area down in here again, then all of a sudden we start to say, okay, we're breaking the October lows, October 2nd lows. We're starting to break yesterday's lows. And again, more confirmation that the game is changing. Okay. So I think that's good on the S&P. We might as well just stay on that one. The Dow looks pretty good. The Dow's hanging in there. So what's funny is maybe the Dow is going to take the leadership role now, potentially, right? The Dow, because again, if you're talking about some insecurities in Europe, something's going on there, okay? And again, back to that chart, back to this one, October 9th, right? The euro, something's going on there, right? If there's something going to happen there, then what's going to happen? Money will flow into the dollar, okay? And I got to show you this chart here in a second. Money flows into the dollar, okay? Money's flowing into gold. Again, it's another fear haven. But let's say money flows into the dollar. Where's it going to go? It's not probably going to go it probably will go to the Dow, right? The Dow 30. That's where outside money tends to go, right? In a capital flight. So maybe the Dow holds up better And maybe these stocks just go sideways for a while, right? We can't rule that out. We just think that we get in this mindset that stocks have to go up or down big or whatever. Maybe they just go sideways for quite some time. And the Dow takes a leadership role from a capital flight from outside the US. A lot of things to think about on this front. And that's why we watch this Russell 2000 as well, right? To see if the US is actually growing internally from the ground up, green shoots, or is this just a capital flow from outside the U.S.? There's clearly a lot of money moving around right now. This gold blowing through 4,000. I mean, it didn't even hesitate at 4,000. All right. So let me just show you this real quick before I forget. I wanted to show you this because this was a headline right out of Bloomberg, right, on gold. Okay, so let me clear this off there. Let me get rid of this thing. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Okay. That way you can see the headline. Okay. So it says here, gold tops 4,000 for the first time. Fueled. Oh, boy. Why is that on there? See if I can get rid of that. Now it leaves that thing. Okay. Anyway, you get the point. The most important stuff's at the bottom anyway. So gold tops 4,000 for the first time, fueled by a U.S. shutdown. Gold has surged more than 50% this year amid concerns over global rate, Fed independence, and U.S. fiscal stability. So what they say is, look at this one on the left, right? We talked about Ken Griffin the other day, right? He's running this symposium, and let me see if I can throw myself in here. Probably not. No. Maybe there. No, that's not good either. All right, I'll just turn it off. Ken Griffin was running this symposium, and he was out talking about, the gold being fearful and the U.S. stock market being, overcooked on a sugar high. And this might be part of the sell-off from yesterday, okay? But here's the real takeaway, is that they were trashing the dollar, okay? Dalio was trashing the dollar. Ray Dalio, okay, used to run this big fund. Ken Griffin trashing the dollar, right? So here they are. Dalio echoes Griffin in seeing gold as safer than the dollar, okay? And yet, look right next to that. I highlighted it in purple. The dollar closes in on 2-month high as global fiscal woes mount. Okay, so if we look at the dollar, let's look at the dollar. Let's go look at it, actually. Let's take a look at this, and let's jump over and look at the dollar. That'll be a good place to go. I want to show you this because I just don't buy this story, right? This is one thing that I don't buy. Now, I may get, schooled by this and have to come back with my tail between my legs in a couple days. But the point is, for right now, we've talked about this, okay? This is this 4-hour chart on the dollar, and we talked about this on Monday. We've got this purple shaded zone. The market had come up and tested it back here, and this is July right here. This is August, all right? This is late August. So that was early August. That's late August. And this is early September. Okay. And then we had this one blowout up in here. This was end of July. But other than that, there's been a fair amount of resistance for this dollar up in that zone. Okay. And this one right here is late September. All right. Now, we just popped through. Okay. So now we can measure the risk against this purple shaded zone. So if the dollar stays above that, okay, what does that do? It puts pressure on all the currencies on the other side of this, right? The euro, the Japanese yen, the British pound, Swiss franc, Canadian dollar, Australian dollar. And we want to break those apart because each one of those currencies has its own little thing, right? We talk about the Canadian dollar and the Australian dollar having more of a commodity backing. UK, the British pound is going to have more of a financial backing. Okay, the euro is going to have this, I think, right? If we're going back to that date, this one of the 9th, we're going to look at this euro, okay, as potentially hitting some sort of a tumultuous time, that second arrow, right? That yellow box says panic cycle. That's on October 9th. So tomorrow would kick off if this guy's right. Okay. If his model's correct, then this makes some sense, right? The dollar's showing itself. We can manage the risk against this. So if this guy's right, we can manage the risk. If this guy's wrong, then we'll know, right? It's below the purple. This guy's crazy, right? He's wrong. He's wrong again, right? He's not. When he's right, he can be really, really right. Okay. And, you wonder, is it a coincidence or not? I don't think it's not a coincidence, right? Because he's called some big calls at times, but sometimes, look, you think things are going to move and they just don't, right? And, but if if his model's right, if the overvalued that I'm seeing in the stocks is right, if this ominous feeling that I'm getting is right, then we can measure this through the dollar, right? Will the dollar be the recipient of something bad happening in the European region? All right. And then if we look a little bit longer term, we can see the bigger picture on this with the dollar. Okay, here we go. So let me clear this off of here. Okay, so we've got this is monthly chart going all the way back to 2000, 2008. We look at this one all the time, right? We've got this upward sloping trend channel. We have a converging triangle. No matter what they say about the dollar, Dalio, Ken Griffin, I mean, these are the biggest investors of all time, right? It's a handful of the biggest investors of all time telling us that the dollar's trash, don't do it, whatever. And I'm, it's, again, when you trade, you have to make your own decisions, right? Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. In this particular case, I'm tending to disagree with them, and there could be a dozen reasons why, right? I don't trust them. I think they're manipulating. I think they're paid for. I think they're this. And someone mentioned that. Is Ken Griffin have ties to China yesterday? I think it was Filippo, and yes, I mean there is. I did a search on that, and there are ties to there. But again, all those things are factors, but what really matters is what does a dollar do? I mean, that's the bottom line. Does a dollar go up from here or not? It's really that simple. We can sit here and speculate all day long, is this going to matter, that going to matter, is this going to matter? But in the end, this is all that really matters on this 4-hour chart. Is the dollar, can it stay above this 98.31 to 98.20 range? And then we talked about this too. I think it was on this one. Yeah, I think this will work. Can the thing actually rally, take out this high right there, okay, and actually get back up to here with this purple lines at 100? So that would be a huge level for the dollar to clear. Now, could the dollar have a rally and a short-lived rally and just get back up to 100 and then that's it? I mean, that's a spot to potentially sell, right? I mean, and the dollar is dead, and it's going to get crushed from there. However, if it climbs above that $100 level, you can see all the prior points back in here. And why does this matter? Because again, this is a lot about the U.S.'s survival. I mean, the survival of the world reserve currency, the dollar. I mean, these are pretty big topics, and we're sitting here right here in the midst of it, watching this euro potentially about ready to create a panic cycle and it may be a failure. Same thing with the Swiss franc, some of these things, and we're seeing the dollar. What's it going to do here? What is it going to climb above that 100? And is it going to make a run for these upper levels on? And here's the other thing. The reason I mentioned Argentina in there, and I threw that one in there, is Argentina needs dollars, right? They're desperate for dollars, okay? And they're desperate for loans, but they're desperate for dollars. And they said a long time ago, I know we talked about this in here, but most people probably didn't, I wouldn't expect this to stick, but maybe it did with someone, that Argentina said, Milei said, you can do anything you want in, how did he say that? You can buy anything you want in dollars except your taxes or something like that, right? That you have to pay in the Argentinian peso, okay? You have to use it for that, all right? The point is, these countries are starved for U.S. dollars, okay? They have a lot of debt on their balance sheet, and they need this to pay back these debts. Who is the debt owned to? Someone else asked a great question in here. It's been a little while ago, but someone said, who do we actually owe all this to? And that's the really big question. We could maybe default on the majority of this debt, right? And the question is, who really holds all this debt? That's a really great question. A lot of it is pensions and 401ks and things like that, but there's a lot of it that's not spoken for, that you can't really say who holds this money? Some of it's at the Fed, some of it's but there's a big chunk that's just sort of missing in action. Who do we owe all this $37 trillion to, right? Because it doesn't all add up, right? It doesn't, 2 plus 2 does not equal 8, right? Something's missing in here, all right? And so that's the big question. So we could potentially default on this debt, and it might not, again, it would be very ugly, right? We'd go through a very ugly period of time financially, but, it might be, it's good for mankind long-term maybe, right? And that's where we're at. We're at this wait and see moment. What's going to happen? Will this dollar climb up above here against all these other gurus, right? The Griffins and the Dalios and all these people. And will the people actually win? Because a higher dollar, what does that mean? Deflation. It means these people lose, right? And why are they driving so hard on this AI front? Maybe because they know they're up against the wall and they're going to go for broke, right? And maybe, just maybe, President Trump is funneling them down into a place where they are going to fail. I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. All I know is we're at a point in time where we should start to see here pretty quickly, and hopefully these markets will help us sort this out. Right? The euro, will it go into a panic cycle? What does that mean? Will it come into the dollar? If that happens, it makes our life easier, right? Easier. It would probably put some pressure on gold, but let's take a look at gold, because gold really shows no signs of backing off. Let's take a look at that, and then we'll take a quick look at silver. And then we probably need to take a look at the natural gas too, because I haven't looked at that, because you're dealing with all these. Let's look at natural gas. Okay, so natural gas, we have a new harmonic structure. Okay, we've been talking about this. This is the old one, though. I haven't introduced the new one. Let me just crank this up so we get the, okay, so this is our breakout zone, this pink shaded breakout zone. Remember, longer term, the natural gas looks good on the upside. All right, we've been through that. Most of you are watching are probably aware of that. The key is this, I probably don't need to go through that. If this natural gas can rise above this pink shaded zone, that's a really good situation for the natural gas, right? We've been talking about that. If it can climb back above here, that starts to set up the situation for higher natural gas. Let's look at crude oil. So this looks good. And I'll add that other harmonic structure in here, but I'm kind of glad I didn't, because it just sort of muddies the waters. And then we got two things. Right now we know, it's like the light is on or the light is off. It's that simple, right? Is the natural gas above it or isn't it? When we add another one, it's like, the clock, right? Is it right? Now we're saying, it's right twice a day, as it is. If we start adding another clock, it muddies the waters, right? But we'll do it. We're going to do that. We'll add the other harmonic structure in here. But this is a simple thing to look at for now. All right, let's take a look at this. Let's go back and look at crude oil, see what it's doing. Okay, so nothing. Actually looking pretty good to the downside this morning. I need to put a position on in this. This is a great spot right up here. You can see a moving average coming in. We've got the 63.18. All right, right there. It almost retested again. 63.18, we have this other harmonic structure. That's that pink shaded zone. Again, one that I don't have a lot of trust in. However, we do have signals in natural gas, signals in heating oil, and new ones. And we have the other one that seems to be working. Maybe this thing will work out, right? This harmonic structure. I'm going to start laying the levels out on this. As long as it can hold below 63.18, we'll look at the downside halfway on this harmonic structure, and it might give us a target. We know that there's a lot of people out there saying $50. We should see a $50 print. That doesn't mean 50. It means maybe 59, 59.99, right? Some kind of a print in the high 50s. And we're not even really looking for that in here. What we're looking for is the sideways to down, right? Sideways to slightly down, and that bear put spread. That's what we've been talking about. There might be a chance here for some directional bets in this. And there might be a chance if someone has energy holdings to think about, okay, maybe I need to skew a little bit more toward natural gas and a little bit less toward the crude oil, okay, if someone has holdings in there. So hopefully that gives decent oversight on this. All right, and what else are we going to look at? Oh, yeah, gold and silver. Let's take a look at that. So let's look at silver first. So you can see the silver getting up toward those prior highs. You would think, right? Is this what drove gold through 4,000, right? It had to keep up with its brother, right? Silver, and now silver's at this prior high, this 49, it's essentially there. I don't think it quite got there. I think it hit 48.80, something like that. Let's see. Maybe we can see it on the chart here. But it's not what I wanted. Okay, let me slide this over. All right, let's take a look and see what the actual high was in this silver. 48.83. Okay, so that was about right. 48.83. This all-time high back in here. Again, this is on a continuous contract, so you can't say that that's for sure it. But it looks like the all-time high on this was. I don't know why I'm not getting it. 49.76 maybe. It's hard to tell. 49. All-time high, the exact all-time high, 49.81, somewhere around there, sub $50 an ounce. Okay, that's going to be the big target. So, is it close enough? Is that what drove gold through? This 4,000, like it was, going through like a knife through hot butter. Maybe. Let me let's see. Bitcoin's hanging out around 123,000. Again, nothing to talk about there. I would say if we could tighten up a stop on a long Bitcoin, you'd want it to be around 113. 100,000 is the big psychological level on Bitcoin. It's hard to tighten it up any more than that unless you're trading intraday, right? It's hard to say, it's hard to give any more direction other than 112. 112 would be a stop level than 100, right? Anything other than that, look, you just have to let this thing go. We talked about this, potential head and shoulders top. I think that's been negated with this last move up. Okay, so I was leaning on some people again who were experts, right? Again, in the end, you have to make your own decisions, right? You listen to what I have to say, listen to what others have to say. I'm going to try to give it to you the best I know it, right? Whether it's pretty, whether it's not pretty, whatever. I'm going to, but take it for what it's worth. In the end, we all have to make our own decisions. And the key is this head and shoulders on the Bitcoin, right? Let me just flip to that since we're talking about it. This head and shoulders looks like it's been actually blown to shreds. Okay, and there's an energy build here too. So will it release on silver hitting close to that $50 an ounce, big psychological level, right? And a prior high. So that should provide something, right? Some kind of resistance in this metals market. Could the metals market hang out up here for a little while and then we see a 10 to 15 to 20 to 30% pullback in them? Sure. That would be normal, right? But we're not in normal situation here. Like something feels like it's going on and you have to respect this gold on the upside when it blows through something like 4,000, like it doesn't even matter. Okay. Now, was it because of silver? That's what I'm asking. Is it because of silver? All right. Now let's take a look at this. Let me make sure we're good on that. Okay. All right, let's take a look at this gold. See if there's anything forming here. Like I said, I've been taking shorts in this, and you get some really good short opportunities in it, but you just have to be so careful, right? Because this thing will just shred. It will just shred you if you're not careful. So I don't see any divergence, anything forming. Maybe a chance here on this chart, maybe a little bit. Maybe right around in here. But this was the move through that 4,000 last night. You can see, let me just mark this for you. 4,000. So we're talking about right here. Okay, so here's the 4,000 level. So, very little resistance here. Came up, almost got there, spent a little time around it last night. Then I was actually up pretty late. And this thing, I'm trading, and I just watched this thing go right here. And I'm like, this is just crazy that it just doesn't even care. And it just raises concern that raises red flags that there's a lot of concern out there. Something's going on. Is it just silver trying to get to 50 and gold had to come along with it? Is it Bitcoin? What is it thinking? Again, I think Bitcoin's a fraud. But maybe they can make it work, right? Maybe somehow there's enough of it out there and so forth. But there's just so many things that scream fraud to me on Bitcoin, even though, like I said, I hold some, but then because it's a trading thing, right? And it keeps going up, but let's just see what happens over the next day or two. And I think we've covered, we've talked about the dollar, the gold, Griffin, Dalio, Bloomberg, everybody talking this dollar into the ground again. I see the dollar looking okay right now. I don't want to call it great, but we cleared a hurdle. Step number 1 is complete, right? Dollar had to clear that hurdle. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is it needs to make an advance toward that $100. It's not $100. The 100 on the index, right? It's an index. So 100 would be the level. Let's see if that's step 2. It's a big step 2, right? And there's a lot of interim steps maybe we'll get into, but the big number step 2 or step 2, step 3 would be, can it get to 100 and can it break through? If it does that, it's going to start to shake things up, right? And that means this euro is probably falling apart. Swiss franc, British pound, all these things in Europe are going to be a train wreck. And what does that mean for all this technocracy, right? Do they use that? Today I talked a lot about that, this technocracy. I'm very concerned about it. There's a lot of things that are raising red flags around it. Very, very concerned about this. And, we're at this, I always hate to say we're at a wait and see because once we wait and see, then we're going to be at another wait and see, right? And at some point we have to start making decisions. And that's what Aaron Day is doing, right? Trying to I think tomorrow night he's going to be talking about Freedom Dollar, right? A privacy coin. He's going to be talking about, Zano, I'm sure, as part of that. So these are ways that, at least temporarily, right, until, quantum computing comes along, that these are places where, that are truly private that people can get away from. And so is gold if you buy it the right way. Gold can be very private, but it's not the way most people are promoting it, So therefore, you might as well just buy the ETF on the upside if that's what you want, right? Silver, the same thing. It depends on how you buy it, and so forth. If you want the privacy component, if you just want the upside, then hey, look, gold's been fantastic. I've been fighting it for a long, long time. It hasn't been unproductive for me, but it would have been a lot easier to just buy it and sit back, like everybody says. The problem is, I think there could come a day where it sees a 8 to 15% sell off in a 1 to 3 day window of time. That's the way markets that do something like this respond, is they ultimately see a massive sell off, and it's just a run for the doors, right? And it's just panic running for the doors, But there might be something else going on. We are at a very interesting point in time. And so with that, I can just keep babbling here. Hopefully we looked at the dollar, we looked at this euro, put that in perspective, looked at these tech deals, talked about this tech deal. It's another strange tech deal, at least not an ownership, more debt, what's Elon Musk up to, right? What is this guy? What is NVIDIA up to, right? What are these guys all up to? What's going on with the UK, with us renegotiating, I guess, somewhere backing off this trade deal, this 15% tariff deal, and now trying to get access to their digital, protections. What are we doing trying to tear that stuff down? Another big question we have to ask ourselves. And then just the overall markets, the stocks, are the stocks nearing a top? We can watch that. We can watch this thing. There we go. This is what I'll be watching, is this upward sloping trend channel, and trying to manage the risk against this. Let's see what we're doing on this as we close out. So we're hanging right around this moving average, So I'm just going to add a little bit more here. So we'll just add, that's what I'll be doing, is adding and seeing if this thing holds. And if it doesn't hold, then I'll be winding this thing down, right? If it starts climbing above that black line and spending a bunch of time up there, this is what we call confluence. This moving average is coming over. We're at the upper end of this upward sloping trend channel. We're at this looks like we're right at this prior low right back in here. This one right there. So we've got a couple things here that tell us this thing could hold. Will it hold? If not, I'm bailing out. If so, I'm going to be adding to it all day long. So with that, we'll see what happens. We'll pick it up tomorrow with Equity Thursday. Perfect day to come back and see what happens. So with that, everyone, have a blessed day, and I will see you tomorrow. Thank you.